Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. All right, last one there's the rotten egg. Let's go.
I forgot that.
I want to invite you to open up with me to Matthew 7 this morning. I told some of the men before church I had planned last Sunday to preach this sermon in Matthew 7, and then the Lord had other plans toward the end of the week, did something different, and then with everything that had been going on, I added more to this and made some more changes. And last night I just felt this urge from God that I don't need to be using this today, and that makes me very uncomfortable. I'm sure you understand. But sometimes you don't know the why of things, but I think we'd all agree when you feel God moving you to do something, you better do it. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because we got into this pretty good bit Wednesday. But everything that is going on in our society right now, I think we all agree is bad. The murder of George Floyd is really bad. We're thankful for the right to protest, but we also acknowledge the domestic terrorism is bad, not acceptable, not okay. But our world has been lied to. Our society has been lied to. We've been tricked. We've been, the old word, hoodwinked. You know, if you was to go around the world or the country or the state or our city right now and ask people, what is the biggest problem? If you was to go around and ask people, what is the biggest problem? What is the most tragic tragedy that's going on? You'd get a lot of different answers. Some people would say it's COVID-19. Some people would say it's the murder of George Floyd. Some people would say it's the domestic terrorism. Some people would say it's racial inequality or economic inequality, or all. You get a lot of different answers. Very few people would give you the right answer as to what is actually the biggest problem. And just think about that. Don't answer out loud, but just think about it for a minute. What do you think, like, of all the things that's going on in this world, of all the things that can happen in this life, what do you think is the absolute worst thing that could happen to somebody? Now, I think most of us, I would assume, would say, well, the worst thing that could happen to somebody is they die and go to hell. I think I can make an argument that there's something even worse than that is going on. In Matthew chapter 7 and verse 21, Jesus says this: "Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven." I know that the worst thing that's going on is that there's a lot of people saying, Lord, Lord, and they're going to go to hell when they die. You know, it's one thing to go through life knowing that you're going to go to hell and then go to hell. But could you imagine going through life thinking you're going to go to heaven, but then you go to hell? There was a survey by Pew Forum on religion in public life. And they did this survey, and their survey said that over 246 million people in America were Christians. So they said over 246 million Christians we have in America. They said 79.5% of people in America are Christians. That's what this survey said. So they would say that most people in America are going to go to heaven when they die. That's what they would say. Look at what Jesus says in verse 13. Enter through the narrow gate. I was witnessing to a family member one time, and he is like ultra liberal, and was talking to him about, Jesus is the only way, and he said that I was narrow-minded. Well, it's a narrow gate, isn't it? Turns out Jesus was narrow-minded too. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who enter through it. For the gate is small and the way is narrow that leads to life, and there are few who find it. So how does that match up to this survey that was done? That 79, that essentially 80% of the people around us are going to heaven. Jesus says it's only a few people that are going to go to heaven. Like across the state, across the country, across the world, only a few are going into heaven. Now just think about that for a minute. You know, a lot of people grow up thinking that, well, you know, a few people go to hell, but most people go to heaven. That's what a lot of people grow up thinking. Jesus says no. Out of everybody in the world, it's only a few that's going to heaven. And then he says, but those that enter in at the wide gate that leads to destruction, which is another word for hell, he says many enter in that gate. And many is another way of saying what? Most, right? If only a few's going to heaven, then most are going to hell. Now notice a couple things about this person here. He says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say, now there's that word again. Okay? Many is another way of saying what? Most. So, most people will say to him on that day, what day? This is the day. This is the day. This is the day that all your other days, every moment of your life is aiming towards this one day. The day. Judgment Day. On that day, here's what most, now think about this now. Not some, not a few. This is what most people are going to say to God on this day. Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And did we not in your name cast out demons and in your name perform many miracles? And I'll say to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Now, I want you to notice who Jesus is not talking to. Like, this would not shock me if he was talking to an atheist. You know what I'm saying? This would not shock me if he was talking to a Muslim or a Buddhist or whatever. He's not talking to that kind of person, though. As a matter of fact, he's not even talking to a Pharisee. You know, the Pharisees rejected Jesus as Lord, right? This guy in this verse, he's got pretty good theology. His beliefs are pretty good. He knows that Jesus is the Lord God. Not only was his beliefs pretty squared away, but also, look at his resume. He said, I prophesied in your name. I cast out demons in your name. As a matter of fact, I performed miracles in your name. How many of us can say that we've cast out a demon? Anybody? I haven't, as far as I know. How many of us can say that we have performed a miracle? I haven't. This guy says that he has cast out demons. This guy says that he has performed miracles. And his beliefs are right on track. Jesus is the Lord God Messiah. And notice another thing. Do you get the sense that this man is shocked out of his mind? Because I do. You know, I used to work for a man building cabinets years ago, and there was this guy that we would do work for, and he come in one day, and evidently it was taking us longer than he thought it should take, and he come in, and the man I worked for, he started cussing him and just talking all kind of bad. Well, this man, it was Mr. Jerry right down the road here, in his shop. Not the guy cussing. Don't misunderstand. The other guy. All right, Brother Jerry, all the time, got Southern gospel music playing in his shop all the time. And this guy comes in and he, cusses him out and all this kind of stuff. And then as he's walking away, he starts humming the gospel music that was playing in the shop. You're like, man, how fake could you be? This is not that kind of guy. This is not somebody who goes their whole life and they know they're lost, but they're pretending. This is not that kind of person. This is somebody who actually thinks they're saved. I mean, this is the person that they've got the fish symbol on their bumper. I mean, if you're casting out demons and you're performing miracles, you definitely got the fish symbol on your bumper. Agreed? You know, he's got the T-shirt that says "Vote for Jesus." I mean, he's in church. I'm sure he's like prays over his food and does all that kind of stuff. And then he dies. And he stands before Jesus Christ at judgment. And he's expecting to hear, welcome. But what does he hear? I never knew you. I never knew you. There's one place in this existence where you don't want to be surprised, and it's at judgment. Agree? That's the one place you don't want to be surprised. Now here's the question. Why? Okay, I mean, he's casting out demons, he's performing miracles, his theology is right on track. Why is Jesus saying to him, depart from me? Well, he says, you who practice what? Lawlessness. So that means we're saved by practicing the law, right? We're saved by works, right? No, he's not saying that. Remember, back in verse 13, Jesus just said, enter in through the narrow gate. Now here's something here's a law that you can't violate. If you enter in at the narrow gate, you will wind up walking in the broad way. Right? The narrow gate only opens up to the narrow way. The narrow gate doesn't open up to the broad way. It opens up to the narrow way. So if you really have entered in at the narrow gate, then you really will be living in the narrow way. Now, so does that mean that if I sin, that if I mess up, that just means I never really entered into the narrow gate? How many of us sin? Let's raise our hands. Does that mean all of us in here ain't really saved? Let me tell you something. If we're saved by works, then we're all in trouble. You know, Jesus was once asked, what's the most important law? What's the most important commandment? Like if you had to rank them from most important on down, and Jesus said, here's the most important one. Essentially, love God like he deserves to be loved. How many of us have ever loved God like he deserves to be loved? None of us. We fail at that all the time. So I've used this illustration before, but I'll use it again to make a point. I'm going to give you a scenario, and we'll put two different people through this scenario. First, we'll put a lost person through this scenario, and then we'll put a saved person through this scenario. All right? Dr. Drew, guy wakes up one morning, he's late for work. He kept hitting the snooze button. Finally, he looks at the clock, and he's like 30 minutes late. So he jumps out of bed, he's jerking clothes out of the closet. You know, he falls down trying to get his stuff on, and then he runs to the coffee maker and he's pouring his coffee and he spills it on the shirt, has to go back. He kicks the cat on the way to the closet because he's so mad, and finally gets that shirt on and gets his briefcase packed, and he finally gets to the door, and Lance, as soon as he puts his hand on the doorknob, he hears his wife say, "Honey, on your way out, could you take out the trash?" And this is a lost man, right? And so he says, "Woman, how come every time I'm late for work, it's then that you ask me to take out the trash? Could you not find a better time to ask me to take out the trash except for when I'm late to work? How about this? How about you get up and you take out the trash?" And he gets out, walks out, slams the door, gets his car, goes to work, goes about his day. Now, same scenario, except this time, it's not a lost man, it's a saved man. This is somebody who, if any man be in Christ, he's a new creature. He's born again. He's got a new heart, new desires, all that kind of stuff. Wakes up late for work. He's running like 30 minutes late. Jerking clothes out of the closet. Falls down trying to put his clothes on. Goes to get his coffee. He's pouring the coffee. He spills it on his shirt. He has to go to the closet, get another shirt. He's kicking the cat because he's mad. He goes and he's packing his briefcase. He gets to the door. And as soon as he places his hand on the door, Sam, his wife says, "Honey, could you take out the trash?" And because he's born again, he says to her, "Woman, how come every time I'm late for work, you always ask me to take out the trash? How about you get up and you take out the trash?" And he walks out and he slams the door. But as soon as he slams that door, it was as if you stabbed him in the heart with a knife. Now, this is not a man that's perfect, but this is a man that has been what? Changed. He's just not what he used to be. He's not perfect. Doesn't cross every T and dot every I, but he ain't what he used to be. You know, when I was a younger Christian, I guess I was naive, I guess. But you know, you go up here and don't judge a book by its cover, right? How many of us have heard that? You know what Jesus said? You will know them by their, so much for don't judge a book by its cover. You know, you go up here and people say, you don't know me. You don't know my heart. Jesus says, I don't have to know your heart. I can look at your fruit. But, I grew up hearing that, and so I just kind of, if somebody, went up in front of the church and they prayed the prayer and they got baptized, I just said, oh, well, they're saved, Who am I to say they're not saved? They prayed the prayer, they say they're saved. This guy here, he says he's saved. He's got a great profession of faith. Lord, Lord. But you know what this tells me? How much is your profession of faith worth on the day of judgment? Doesn't mean a thing. But, so when I was a younger Christian, I just kind of took that for granted. And this was before I was pastor. I was a member at Southside, and one of the ladies there, she asked me if I would go and encourage her grandson, who she said was backslidden. He was not in church anymore, and kind of going back some of his old ways and all that kind of stuff. And so I was in school with him anyways. I knew him good, so I talked with him and just told him, hey man, you need to come back to church. You're not doing any good not coming to church. This is where you need to be. And get back in the Word. And get back to following the Lord. And man, stop going to them places. There ain't nothing good there. Went through all that, and this is where the light bulb went off for me. He told me, he said, and it wasn't what he said, Ricky. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. He said, you're right, man. I need to stop going there and stop doing those things. And you're right. I need to start going back to church and start reading my Bible and doing all that. And then that was when the light went, like it just hit me. Man, dude, you're not backsliding. You're lost. That was the first time it was like an aha moment. So you're not backsliding. You don't need encouragement. You need life. You need to be born again. Because what you're really saying, you're right, I gotta get back in church. What he's actually saying is, I need to stop doing this stuff that I actually love, sin, and I need to start doing this stuff that I actually hate, church and the Bible and God. And you know what? That's just like this guy right here. You go your whole life thinking that you've got it, thinking that you're saved. You're just doing religion, though. You're just going through the motions. You're just doing the works, and you really don't even enjoy it, but you do it anyways because that's what you're supposed to do. And you go your whole life thinking that way, and then you die, and then you stand before a living Creator God at judgment, and He looks at you, and you get the shock of your life because He says, I don't know you. I never knew you. That's this man right here. And we want to say the biggest problem is COVID-19 or the biggest problem is racial inequality. The biggest problem is that we are surrounded by millions of people who think they're saved and they're not. And you want to talk about an injustice? Here's an injustice. Here we are. We come every Sunday to this building and we know the truth. We know the truth. If you're saved, there's going to be proof of that salvation. And then we got people in our family and we've got friends and their fruit's not there. And we don't tell them. Now that's injustice. That's blood on our hands. He goes on verse 24 and he says, therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and slammed against that house and it didn't fall. And why didn't it fall? Because he was such a good guy? Because he was such a good builder? He used the best materials? Why didn't it fall? Because he built it on the rock. Verse 26. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and slammed against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Look, here's three things that every single person on planet Earth has in common. Number one, we all get the warning. Every one of us, we all get the warning. Number two, we are all building our own house. Somebody else does not build your house for you. You build your own house. You make your own choices. You make your own decisions. We all build our own house. And number two, the storm is going to come to every single one of us. That is the storm as in God's that day, remember? That day, the day, judgment. Everybody gets the warning that the storm is coming. And then everybody chooses, okay, how am I going to build my house? Am I going to depend on my works for my salvation? Am I going to build on the sand of works? Am I going to build on the sand of I'm going to try to be a good person? Or do you build on the rock? And what is the rock? He says, everyone who hears these words of mine, the rock that does not fail, the rock that does not fall, the rock that will not let you down, is the word of Jesus Christ, the gospel. Now, I want one more thing and I'll close. He says, the one who hears these words of mine and does not act on them may be compared to what kind of man? Foolish man. You see, here's the thing. Very well may be someone here this morning. But there are people who will hear this. You've heard the warning. The storm's coming. It's not that it might come. It's not that there's a strong possibility that it'll come. It's coming. You're going to die, and you're going to stand before Him at judgment. That's going to happen. You're going to hear this. You know you're a sinner. You know you need salvation. And we're going to close in prayer here in a few minutes. And you're going to go on about your day. And then you're going to be the guy in verse 21. That is why Jesus says that person, that's a fool. You heard the warning. You heard it. I think there's, Brother Mike, I think there's a lot of people that hear this sermon all the time. Like you've heard this verse so many times. And you sit in church and you're like, Richard, man, tell him. Hey, that guy over there needs to hear that. This lady over here, she needs to hear that. Preach it. Imagine if you get home from church today and you sit at the TV, you turn on Fox News, and they're talking about some horrible person. This person who has just done something terrible and awful, and you're listening to it and you're like, yeah, I agree. That's terrible. And then you turn it to CNN, and they too are talking about this person that's done something so horrible, horrific, and terrible. And you're like, yes, that is terrible. And then a few minutes later, you realize that they're talking about you. Now, imagine if you died, like you leave church today, you're on the way home and you have a car wreck and you die. All right? And the Bible says it's been appointed man wants to die, and then right after that, it's judgment. There's no waiting time. It's just instantaneous. But let's just say there was a waiting room right outside the court of heaven. All right, right outside the courtroom of this waiting room. And you're sitting in there, and you're hearing the Trinity of God speaking. The Father and the Son and Holy Spirit, they are talking amongst themselves. And they're talking about this person whom, the Father says, I sent my Son to die for this person. I paid the ultimate price to purchase this person off of the slave market of sin, and they said no. I can't let them in heaven. And you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I agree. And then you walk in and realize